first thing Garrett Lawson noticed was the smell of coffee. Not the kind his assistant brought him every morning in a paper cup from the lobby cafe downstairs, smooth, predictable, expensive without tasting it. This was something older, burnt at the edges, slightly bitter, the smell of a machine that had been running since 5 in the morning and would keep running until someone remembered to turn it off. It came from somewhere inside Harlow Medical Center, past the sliding glass doors, past the security desk, past the long corridor lined with chairs filled with people who had been waiting long enough to stop looking at the clock. Garrett stood outside under the concrete overhang, wearing a faded gray hoodie, 2 sizes too large, a knit beanie pulled down to his eyebrows, and a pair of scuffed boots he had borrowed from his groundskeeper. 3 days of stubble he had not bothered to shave. In the inside pocket of the hoodie was a wallet containing $43 in cash and a Medicaid card issued to a name that was not his. No one looking at him would have guessed that he was Garrett Lawson, founder and CEO of Lawson Health Partners, the company whose name was printed on the signage above the emergency entrance, on the lanyards worn by every nurse inside, on the donation plaques lining the lobby wall. That was the point. 6 days earlier, a voicemail had been left on the public comment line for Lawson Health Partners. The caller was a woman, elderly, voice shaking. She said she had waited 4 hours in the emergency room with chest pain. She said the intake nurse had asked twice about her insurance before asking about her symptoms. She said when her coverage came up as Medicaid, someone at the desk had whispered something to a colleague that she had not been able to hear but had been able to feel. Garrett's communications team had flagged it. They had drafted a response, empathetic, measured, non-committal, the kind of language designed to make a complaint feel resolved without anything actually changing. He had deleted the draft and driven to Chicago himself. The sliding doors opened with a mechanical sigh. The waiting room was already full at 8:15 in the morning. A man in a work jacket held a bandaged hand against his chest and stared at the floor. A young mother balanced a sleeping toddler across her knees while filling out a form with her free hand. An older couple sat close together, not speaking, the kind of silence that meant they had already said everything and were now just waiting for someone else to say something back. Garrett approached the intake window. The woman behind it had the look of someone who had answered the same questions 600 times and had stopped expecting new ones. "I need to be seen," he said. He kept his voice low, unremarkable. She slid a clipboard through the gap without looking up. "Fill this out. Insurance card, if you have one." He handed over the Medicaid card. She glanced at it, typed something, glanced again. "How long is the wait?" he asked. "Can't say." She was already looking past him. "Have a seat." He found a chair near the window, one of the few with a clear view of the intake desk and the corridor leading to the examination bays. From there he watched. He had a system for this. 15 years of building hospitals taught you to read a room the way a contractor read a building, not by what was visible but by what was holding weight. Within 20 minutes, he had seen enough to know that the voicemail had not been an isolated complaint. He watched a man in a suit with private insurance paperwork get called back in under 8 minutes. He watched 2 Medicaid patients told to wait without explanation after a shift change. He watched an intake coordinator roll her eyes at a screen and say something under her breath to a colleague that made them both smile in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. At the 40-minute mark, a woman in green scrubs came through the corridor doors, checked a tablet, and called a name. When no one answered, she looked around the room with the efficient scan of someone moving through a checklist. Her eyes landed on Garrett. "You've been waiting a while. What's going on?" "Chest tightness," he said. It was what he had written on the form. She looked at the tablet, then at him, not through him the way the intake coordinator had. At him, on a scale of 1 to 10, 4, maybe 5. "Come with me." Her name badge read Simone Vega, RN. She was somewhere in her late 20s, though the set of her jaw suggested she had been doing this long enough to have earned something older in her eyes. Her hair was pulled back under a clip that had partially given up. Her scrubs had a faint stain near the left pocket that might have been coffee or might have been something she had not had time to deal with. She led him to a bay at the far end of the corridor, away from the busier rooms near the nursing station. He understood why immediately. It was the lowest priority bay, the one assigned to patients the system had deprioritized before they were even examined. He had approved its placement in the floor plan 4 years ago. She clipped a pulse oximeter onto his finger, wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm, and asked him questions in the quiet, unhurried way of someone who had learned that rushing made people lie. Any history of heart issues? No. Shortness of breath? A little. Anyone with you today? No. She wrote something on the tablet. He noticed she wrote more than the intake coordinator had asked. He also noticed that when his blood pressure read slightly elevated, she did not make a face or make a note in the shorthand he had seen some nurses use, the kind of notation that became a judgment before a doctor ever entered the room. "I'm going to get Dr. Abrams to come look at you," she said. "It might be a wait. He's managing 3 other patients right now." "That's fine." She moved to leave. Then she stopped and turned back with the expression of someone deciding something. "Have you eaten this morning?" Garrett blinked. "Not really." She disappeared through the curtain. 2 minutes later, she came back with a small cup of orange juice and 2 packets of crackers. Not from the patient pantry. He could see from the label it was from a vending machine. She set it on the tray beside him without ceremony. "It's not much," she said, "but you look like you've been up since early." He looked at the crackers for a moment. In 15 years, no employee at any Lawson facility had brought him anything. They had brought his clients things, his donors, his board members, the guests who arrived in town cars and left before the food got cold. They had been trained to bring those people things. No one had been trained to bring crackers to a man sitting alone in the low-priority bay on a Medicaid card. "Thank you," he said. Simone Vega nodded once and left. He sat in the bay for the next hour. Dr. Abrams came, ran an EKG, ruled out anything cardiac, suggested stress management with the brisk efficiency of a man who had more rooms to cover. But in that hour, Garrett watched through the gap in the curtain. He watched Simone move between patients with a focus that never looked like performance. He watched her stop at the bed of an elderly man who had been trying to reach someone on a broken phone and quietly dial the number for him on her own. He watched her explain a diagnosis to a teenage girl in language the girl could actually understand, while a doctor had already moved on to the next chart. He watched a charge nurse intercept her in the corridor and say something about overtime authorization that made Simone's expression go still before she nodded and kept moving. He also watched, at the 2-hour mark, a man in a business casual shirt arrive at the intake window with a folder of documentation. Private insurance, premium plan. He was called back in 11 minutes. The Medicaid patient who had arrived 20 minutes before him was still in the waiting room when Garrett was discharged. He asked Simone about it on his way out carefully. "Does it always run this way?" She looked at him with a specific wariness, the look of someone who knew the answer and had decided a long time ago whether it was safe to say it out loud. "It runs how it runs," she said. "That's not an answer." She paused. "No," she said, "it's not." He left through the sliding doors and sat in his rental car for a long time before starting the engine. The next morning he was back, not in the hoodie, in his own clothes, a dark coat, his own shoes, a face that 3 days of stubble could not fully disguise once you were looking for the right things. He asked for Simone Vega at the nursing station. The charge nurse, a heavyset man named Walter Briggs, whose ID badge listed him as patient services supervisor, told him Simone was unavailable. Garrett said he wanted to leave a note of thanks for her care. Walter said he could leave it at the desk. Garrett said he would prefer to thank her in person. Walter's expression shifted in the way of a man recalibrating an interaction he thought he had already categorized. He looked at the coat, the shoes, something behind Garrett's eyes, and his voice dropped half a register. "Can I ask who you are, sir?" Garrett told him. Walter Briggs went very still. By 11 that morning, Garrett was in the hospital administrator's office with Lawson Health's regional director of operations, a sharp and precise woman named Karen Ashford, who had driven in from Milwaukee on 2 hours' notice without asking why. Garrett did not ask Karen to be surprised by what he told her. He had worked with her for 9 years. He knew she would not be. She was not. "The intake stratification by coverage type," he said. "How long has it been running this way?" Karen set her folder on the table. "The incentive structure rewards rapid throughput on private insurance accounts. Medicaid reimbursements are lower and slower. Intake coordinators know this because their performance reviews reflect it. I approve those performance reviews. You approved the metrics. The metrics created the behavior. He sat with that for a moment. It was the thing he had not wanted to hear and the thing he had driven to Chicago to be told. Who else knows? Karen opened the folder. 3 formal complaints in the last 8 months. 2 resolved at the facility level without regional review. 1 forwarded to legal, which advised caution and drafted a non-disclosure offer to the complainant. Garrett looked at the folder. His name was not on any of the documents. It did not need to be. His signature was on the policies that had made every one of those decisions efficient. He asked to see Simone Vega before leaving. She was coming off a 12-hour shift when they found her in the staff break room, jacket on, bag over one shoulder, the look of someone who had already started the process of leaving before her body had caught up. When she saw Garrett in the doorway in his actual clothes with Karen Ashford at his side and a facility administrator hovering near the wall, she went still. Then she looked at him for a long moment and something moved across her face that was not gratitude. "You were the chest pain in Bay 7, she said. "Yes." Her jaw tightened. "How long?" "I was there for about 3 hours yesterday." "No." Her voice was level. "How long have you known about the intake disparity?" The question landed in the room the way a flat stone lands on still water. The administrator shifted against the wall. Karen Ashford did not move. "I didn't know the specifics," Garrett said. "I came to find out." "And now you found out." Simone looked at Karen, then back at him. "Using me as your evidence. That isn't why I came to find you." "Isn't it?" She pulled her bag strap higher on her shoulder. "You sat in that bay for 3 hours. You watched how things run. You went home and told whoever you told, and now there are 3 administrators in the break room and I'm being looked at like I said something I shouldn't have." "You didn't say anything wrong." "I know I didn't." Her voice did not rise, which made it worse. "That's not the point. The point is that I gave orange juice to a man I thought was sick. I didn't agree to be part of an audit." Walter Briggs appeared in the doorway behind them. His expression had the careful composure of a man trying to determine whose side to occupy. He said Simone's overtime had been pre-approved and that she was of course free to speak with Mr. Lawson at her convenience. Simone looked at Walter for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at Garrett. "My convenience," she repeated. She left through the side door without another word. Garrett stood in the break room and said nothing. Karen Ashford gave him 12 seconds before she spoke. "She's right," Karen said. "I know. What do you want to do?" He thought about the waiting room, the man with the bandaged hand, the sleeping toddler, the couple who had already run out of words. He thought about the 11-minute wait for the man with the premium plan, and the patient who was still sitting in the chair when Garrett was discharged. "I want to fix it," he said. "Not explain it. Fix it. That's going to take longer than a press release." "I know that too." Karen closed the folder. "Then we should start tonight." He asked once more where Simone lived. Karen told him that was not something she could give him. Garrett nodded. He had not expected her to. He had asked because he needed to be the kind of person who tried and was refused before going any further, and now he had been refused, and now he could try the harder way. He found her 2 days later, not through the hospital, through a community nursing board where she had published a brief comment 3 months earlier about Medicaid care gaps in urban emergency facilities. The comment had 2 responses. One was supportive. One told her to be careful about what she put in writing. He emailed her from his personal address, not the company letterhead. "Ms. Vega, you were right. I turned your kindness into data without asking. I owe you an apology that I'd like to deliver in person if you're willing. If you're not, I understand that too. G. Lawson." She did not reply for 4 days. On the 5th day, she wrote back 3 sentences. "I'm not interested in being the face of your rebranding. I'm not interested in a promotion or a check. If you want to talk, meet me at the coffee shop on the corner of Archer and 31st on Thursday at 7 in the morning, and don't bring anyone else." He was there at 6:45. She arrived at 7 exactly and sat down across from him without taking off her coat. He had prepared a version of this conversation that was thorough, accountable, and well organized. He had prepared acknowledgments and specifics and a broad outline of what Lawson Health intended to change. He had the folder with him. He did not open it. Instead, he said, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I didn't know what it felt like to sit in that waiting room until 2 weeks ago." Simone wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "That's the problem." "Yes. A lot of problems live in that gap," she said, "between the people who design systems and the people who sit in them. I know that now." She looked at him steadily. "Knowing it now doesn't give back the 4 hours that woman waited with chest pain." "No," he said, "it doesn't." A silence opened between them, not hostile, more like a space she was deciding whether to fill. "My mother works Medicaid," Simone said finally. "She's been working it for 30 years. She raised me in a neighborhood where every single person I grew up with had Medicaid or nothing. When I applied to nursing school, the financial aid office lost my paperwork twice and told me it wasn't their problem." She looked at her coffee. "I know exactly why your intake staff treats Medicaid patients the way they treat them. It's because the entire system has been telling them since the beginning that those patients are worth less. Your performance metrics just made it official." Garrett said nothing. He had learned finally that some things did not improve when you spoke into them. "What are you actually going to change?" she asked. He told her. Not the press release version, the actual version. Intake protocol review across all 14 facilities, anonymous patient reporting line bypassing facility management, coverage blind triage standards piloted at Harlow first, performance metrics restructured to remove the financial incentive for stratification, back wages and formal apologies to the 3 patients who had filed complaints, an independent patient advocacy board with no Lawson Health employees on it. Simone listened without writing anything down. When he finished, she said, "Who's overseeing the independent board?" "I want it to be external. Community health advocates, patient rights organizations, no internal appointments. And when investor pressure comes back to protect margins, I'll need to be the person who holds that line." She looked at him for a long time. "And what happens if you don't?" It was the right question. He had been asking it to himself for a week. "Then the board removes me," he said. "I'm having the governance language written this week." Something shifted in Simone Vega's face. Not warmth, not yet, more like the first easing of a posture that had been braced for a long time. "You know what I told my brother when I got home that night," she said, "after I found out who you were?" "What?" "I told him people like us don't get structural change. We get a nice story and a press release and a photo op, and then 18 months later everything is exactly the same." She picked up her coffee. "He told me I was probably right." "You might still be right," Garrett said. "Yes," she said, "I might." She stood to leave. Then she stopped and looked at him the way she had looked at him in Bay 7, directly, without the performance of either kindness or coldness. "The crackers were from my own money," she said. "Just so you know, the vending machine doesn't take it from the hospital." He had suspected. It was the detail he had been unable to stop thinking about for 2 weeks. "I'll pay you back," he said. "I don't want the money." She pulled on her coat. "I want you to fix the waiting room so next time no one has to choose between buying crackers for a stranger and paying their own gas bill." She paused at the door. "Start with the triage protocol. That's where the damage is worst." Then she left. Garrett sat with his coffee until it went cold. That was the beginning, though it did not feel like one at the time. Beginnings rarely do. They feel like endings, usually of the convenient version of yourself, of the story you had been telling about why things were the way they were. Over the following months, Lawson Health did not transform overnight. Companies did not grow a conscience on a schedule. There were board meetings where margins were defended with language so smooth and logical that Garrett had to remind himself what the waiting room smelled like at 8 in the morning. There were investors who called the triage restructuring a liability risk. There were facility managers who pushed back on the new intake protocols with the quiet, durable resistance of people who had been doing something one way for a long time and did not see why a single CEO's uncomfortable Tuesday should require them to change. Garrett held the line, not because it was easy, but because Simone Vega had asked exactly the right question before walking out of a coffee shop, and he intended to be the person who had answered it correctly when the moment came. The anonymous patient reporting line received 47 submissions in its first 30 days. 14 of them described experiences Garrett recognized from the waiting room. Several described worse. He read every one. Walter Briggs resigned 2 weeks into the restructuring. He cited personal reasons. Garrett accepted the resignation and promoted the charge nurse who had quietly flagged 3 of the patient complaints that had previously disappeared before reaching regional review. The intake disparity at Harlow Medical dropped by 60% over 6 months. It was not zero. Garrett did not pretend it was. He put the number on the quarterly report alongside the goal and the gap, and he left both visible. He emailed Simone once a month, never begging for her approval. Just updates, triage numbers, reporting line totals, governance language finalized, independent board seated. The last line of each email was always the same, still holding the line. She replied maybe once for every 3 emails he sent. Sometimes 1 sentence, sometimes 2. She had taken a position at a community health clinic on the south side where, she mentioned once, the waiting room had plastic chairs and a coffee maker that worked. She was also, she mentioned in the same email, starting a graduate program in public health policy. Her brother had gotten a part-time job. Their landlord had raised the rent again, and she had found a way around it. She did not tell him she was grateful. He did not ask her to be. In the spring, Lawson Health launched the Harlow Equity Initiative, a permanent fund for Medicaid care gap services managed by the independent board with no Lawson Health branding on any of its materials. Simone had made that condition clear in a 3-paragraph email that had no greeting and no signature. He had agreed to every term before finishing reading it. On the night of the launch, he went back to Harlow Medical alone, not in the hoodie, not in a disguise. He walked in through the sliding doors in his own coat, gave his real name at the intake window, and sat down in the waiting room. He waited 40 minutes before a nurse came to find him. He counted the chairs. He looked at the people in them. He thought about the woman who had left the voicemail with the shaking voice. When the nurse arrived, she asked if he was all right. "Yes," he said. "I just wanted to see how it felt." She looked at him with the kind of puzzled professionalism that was really just patience wearing a badge. He thanked her and left. Outside, his phone showed a message from Simone. It had come in while he was sitting in the waiting room. Saw the initiative went live. The community board already has 3 proposals. That's faster than I expected. SV. He stood in the parking lot and read it twice. He typed back, "How's the wait time?" Her reply came 4 minutes later. "Better. Not good yet. Keep going." He put the phone in his pocket and looked up at the Harlow Medical sign, his name still on it in letters large enough to see from across the street. He thought about orange juice and crackers from a vending machine at 8 in the morning. He thought about the question she had asked him in that coffee shop. What happens if you don't? And the fact that she had trusted his answer just enough to watch and see. He thought about the 47 submissions and the 3 complaints that had been buried, and the woman with the shaking voice who had never received a response that meant anything. He did not think about any of this as a love story. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But he thought about it as a debt. Not the kind paid back with a check or a title, but the kind settled slowly by becoming someone different than the person who had first walked through those sliding doors. He got in his car. He drove back to the office. He had 5 meetings the next morning and a board call in the afternoon and a stack of facility reports on his desk that he had started reading differently than he used to. He read them all the way to the bottom now. He read the complaints. He read the gaps. He read the numbers that were supposed to mean everything and noticed what they had learned over time to leave out. That was not nothing. It was not enough. But it was where the work was, and for the first time in 15 years, Garrett Lawson knew exactly where to show up. I keep thinking about the crackers. Not the board meeting, not the governance language or the intake numbers or the press release that never got written, the crackers from a vending machine that a nurse paid for with her own money because she thought a sick man sitting alone in a hospital bay might need something in his stomach. That's the detail I can't put down. There's something I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, but from watching how things actually play out over time, that what we do when no one powerful is watching is the most accurate version of who we are. Simone Vega didn't know she was serving the man whose name was on the building. She just saw someone who looked like he hadn't eaten, and she acted. That's character. That's the kind of moral clarity most people talk about but quietly set aside the moment it costs them something. She paid for those crackers out of a paycheck that wasn't big enough to begin with. She didn't hesitate. And then there's the other side of it. Me, sitting in that bay with a fake name on a Medicaid card, watching a system I had built reward the wrong things efficiently and call it excellence. I had the intelligence to design performance metrics. I had the data. I had 14 facilities worth of reports on my desk every quarter. What I didn't have was the honesty to ask what my numbers were leaving out. That gap between being smart enough to build something and being honest enough to see what it's actually doing, that's where a lot of damage quietly lives. I closed that gap the hard way. I'm not sure there's an easy way. What I respect most about Simone isn't that she was kind, it's that she didn't fold. When she found out the truth, she didn't accept an apology and a title. She asked hard questions and then walked away and waited to see if the answers held up in practice. That takes something tougher than generosity. It takes a willingness to stay unimpressed long enough to find out whether change is real or just well packaged. A lot of people can't do that. The easier thing is to let a big gesture close the account. She didn't let it close. She kept it open and she watched. And that watching is part of why things actually changed. I think about the woman who left that voicemail, the one with the shaking voice who waited 4 hours with chest pain and felt something at the intake desk that she couldn't name but couldn't forget. She never got a response that meant anything. I can't give that back to her. That's the part of accountability that nobody warns you about, that some debts can't be paid to the person you owe them to. You can only pay forward, into systems, into policies, into the slow and unglamorous work of making the next person's experience different. That's not a redemption arc. It's just the work. What Garrett Lawson learned in a hospital waiting room, I think, is something most people in power already know and have gotten very comfortable not acting on. That dignity is not expensive. It is a choice, every single day. And the choice compounds. The same way neglect compounds. The same way every small act of looking past someone adds up to a system that has learned to make invisibility efficient. The waiting room didn't change because of a disguise. It changed because one person refused to pretend the wait was acceptable, and that refusal turned out to be contagious. I hope that's what stays with you, not the secret test, not the reveal. The nurse who bought crackers with her own money and didn't make it a moment. Just a quiet act, done simply, because someone was there and she was there and that was enough reason. That's the whole thing, really. That was always the whole thing.